I couldn't remember the way your Sangha's agenda went. Should I give like maybe a 20 or 30-minute talk now, or would you want me to lead a little meditation first and then give a little talk? How would you?
This is your time, friend. So any way you'd like to do it, just leave us a little time to discuss at the end, maybe 15, 20 minutes. Other than that, it's your night.
Okay, have fun. Ah, ah. Well, yeah, let's start with a sit then. I always like to have a little sit for myself as well. No, for myself as well. Uh, I'm a student of the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and when asked towards the end of his life, like, what's the best teaching you've ever given, or do you have a favorite talk you've ever given the world? He didn't hesitate, and he said, "Oh, yeah, the two sentences: I have arrived, I am home." He's like, that's the best talk I've ever given. And oh, I like to remind myself of that every day, you know? So let's find our comfortable seat and practice arriving and coming home with each other. Hmm. For me, that means a posture that's soft in the front of my body, so that it physically represents my intention to meet each moment in a way that is accepting and non-judgmental. But in order to balance out that soft front, I need a strong back to maintain my equanimity as the world kind of streams at me moment to moment. Mm. And so that's what I seek as I investigate my body each day for my sit, whether I'm sitting, standing, or lying down. I want my front to be soft and my back to be strong. Mm. This period of meditation will begin with one sound of the bell. It'll just be about 5 minutes long, and I'll guide us with a couple of prompts. Be gentle with yourself. Give yourself permission to adjust if you need to. It's really just about showing up for yourself in this moment. Breathing in, I am aware that I have a body. Breathing out, I smile in gratitude for my beautiful body and everything it makes possible for me. In, aware of body. Out, smiling. Breathing in, I am aware that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I am aware that I am breathing out. In, out. Breathing in, I have arrived. Breathing out, I am home. In, arrived. Out, home. Thank you, Sangha. Feel free to stretch out and unwind and massage yourselves. That was just 5 minutes. Wow. Let me start with gratitude. So happy to be back here practicing with the Boundless Freedom Project Sangha. My goodness. I was chitting and chatting with some of the other folks who arrived a little on the early side and saying that, and I want to say to all of you, like, I recommend your Sangha all the time. Like, wow, I love that in Vietnamese, the tradition that I've done a lot of my mindfulness practice in, because Thich Nhat Hanh was a Vietnamese Zen master. The word tham means both mind and heart. And so you could say that the word mindfulness is synonymous with the word heartfulness, right? That those two words mean exactly the same thing. And that's how I always feel about the Boundless Freedom Project. Y'all practice with so much heartfulness. I love it so much. So thanks for having me. Today I'd like to just talk a little bit. I'm going to try to give a short talk because I want to have tons of time to hear from all of you and hear your sharings and maybe take a question or two if anybody has one. I want to talk today about gratitude. It's such a big word and it's such a big part of our practice that lately I've been just kind of unpacking it, and sort of laying its pieces out on the table. In part for myself, to remember like how much is there, how much opportunity that there is for practice inside of this term gratitude. So the first and maybe the most important thing I want to say about gratitude is that, as is the case with everything in Zen, it is a practice, right? Gratitude is a doing, an action masquerading as an idea. Right? But it's a very good mimic, you know. Gratitude can pretend to be something that we should think about. Right? When I would prefer to hold it the way I hold like a push-up, you know, or the washing of a dish. You know? Gratitude is an action, right? It's an action. Just in the same way, I can be operating like a fancy camera, and I can take the action to take off one lens and to put on another. Right? I'm still seeing with the same eyes, right? I'm still photographing and experiencing the world through the same camera, but I can change the lens. And by doing so, I can dramatically change how I'm interacting with the same set of data. Right? I can dramatically change my experience without having to wrestle with all the impermanent and often out of my control external elements of my experience. And so that's how I'd like to start with gratitude is, you know, reminding myself and all of us that what I'm trying to do is to take off whatever lens I may be looking at things with. I have a lot of them, right? I have an anger lens. I have an anxiety lens. You know, I have a lens that's really focused on the problem. Right? You know, we're biologically hardwired, right, for the purposes of survival, to be seeking the problem, right, mentally at all times and trying to fix it, seeking the problem and trying to fix it. This is not our fault, right? There's nothing wrong with us. This is just how the brain works. You know, this is just how my nervous system interacts with all this information that's coming at it, you know, through the sense doors. And so recognizing that, right, I see the pitfall, right? The obvious pitfall is that if I don't do anything to mitigate that habit, right, if I don't put a lot of love and understanding, right, these are the words of my teacher, of Thich Nhat, our teacher, you know, understanding is love, that those two words are synonyms. So if I don't dump a lot of understanding into and around my sometimes beneficial habit of being a problem solver, right, then I can end up in a situation where my whole life becomes a whole list or series of problems to solve. Right? And I'm just going from one to the next. Right? And this can make my experience of life very difficult. Right? It can make my perspectives very small and narrow. It can leave me in a state of uncomfortable hypervigilance, dissatisfaction. If I'm constantly just seeing everything as a problem that I have to solve, well, at the end of my days, right, I can be very exhausted and yet unfulfilled. Because it's endless. You know, no matter how much I eat today, I will experience hunger tomorrow. No matter how well I slept last night, I'm eventually going to get tired today. There's a lot of dissatisfaction sort of built in to the humanity of our, you know, of our experience. And so knowing that, I think it's very important to be able to recognize what lens I have on. Like, for example, when I wake up in the morning, I tend to wake somewhere on the scale between rage and despair. You know, I'm somewhere in there, you know, for just like the first like 20 minutes, 30 minutes of my day. You know? I need to get up. I need to usually get some water, you know, like take a shower, you know, get some water on my body at the very least, like splash cold water on my face. Make a cup of coffee. You know, there's a few things I know I need to do in order to take off that lens, right, that I wake up with, that grumpy, kind of dissatisfied, low mood, you know, isolationist lens that I just tend to wake up with, and to put it down and to put on another one. Because I don't want to go through my day, you know, taking grumpy pictures all day. Uh, like missing, how beautiful somebody's attire is and taking picture of the mud on their shoe, But that's what my brain wants to do just for like the first 20 or 30 minutes. And so one of the lenses that I like to put on is the lens of gratitude, right? And what does that mean? For me, it means a lot of things. When I'm in gratitude, for example, I'm in acceptance. Right? Very difficult to be in a state of gratitude, right? To be looking actively with a grateful eye and to be in a lot of rejection of what's going on, right? You hear how those are at odds. Similarly, if I'm in a focus of gratitude, right? If I have focused my lens to gratitude, then I tend to be pretty non-judgmental, because there again, right? Being really judgmental, being really critical, being very attached to a particular outcome, right? All of these things are directly at odds, right? With the practice, with the action of gratitude. I could go on, but there's one, because there are many aspects to gratitude that are so helpful for us. But one more that I want to be sure to mention today is that gratitude creates space. Right? Gratitude creates space. If I'm in these anti-gratitude states, right, that we've been talking about, if I'm in judgment, if I'm really leaning into what's wrong, if I'm experiencing dissatisfaction and wholeheartedly agreeing with myself about it, right? And kind of whipping myself up into that state, there's not a lot of space, right, in that interface with my experience of being alive, my experience of being a human being. That puts me very quickly in a very small box, But if I can just by hook or by crook, and we're going to talk about many ways, in the next 20 minutes, if I can change that lens and put on the lens of gratitude, it's a very wide angle lens. And very quickly, just by shifting that one gear and injecting even just a little bit of gratitude into what I'm experiencing, it's been my experience that I have a lot more room to breathe, in a physical sense, in a psychological sense. Right? I just feel safer. And that helps me to think more clearly, helps me to hold my feelings even when they're challenged, right, in a way that's more manageable. It gives me a lot more power. It gives me a lot more choice than the small box that I find myself in when there's a dearth of gratitude, when there's a real absence of it. So one of the biggest obstacles that I see towards gratitude, right? Because when we first think of gratitude, I would imagine most of us, because I know I have this experience when I hear the word, I externalize it, right? My first thought is not about gratitude for myself. It's about gratitude for other people and for external experiences. That tends to be the association that I have with that word. But in investigation of it as a practice, what I see is that if I try to be really grateful for things outside of myself before I have cultivated the ability to be grateful for things inside of myself, it's a bit like putting the cart in front of the horse. It can be done, but it's much more difficult in that order, much more difficult. And so another important framing for me about gratitude is that it begins right here. Thich Nhat Hanh was very clear about this. For example, when he talked about peace, he would often say, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Like in the sense of like it, pointing out, the irony of being at like an anti-war protest with a sign that says peace, but to be angrily screaming, It's like, no, this is not the way, If you want there to be peace in the world, it has to start right here. You have to be peaceful. Not to say that there aren't times to, raise our voice against injustice, right? not to say that we need to always be meek, but to make the point that internally, right, internally, if I want something to manifest in the world, well, then the very best place to start is right here, right, inside of the garden of my own identity, you know, inside of my own actions. As the Buddha reminds in the practice of the 5 remembrances, the Buddhist version of memento mori, you know, the Stoic practice around remembering death. You know, our actions are the ground upon which we stand. You know, and in the classic sense, those actions are actually 3 different kinds: thinking, speaking, and actions of deed. Right? These together are called, in classical approaches to Buddhist practice, the triple karma, our thoughts and our speech and our actions. And so, you know, we are in many ways creating our experience of the world around us based on what lens we're wearing, right? Because based on the lens that I have on, that's out of which come my ideas about what's happening, which lead to what I say to myself and other people about what's happening, which leads to what I do. And so I see that the biggest obstacle I encounter inside of myself and in other people to having a lot of gratitude, right? Having gratitude on tap, which is what I want, you know, is a lack of internal gratitude. It's not easy to be grateful for ourselves, to be nice to ourselves, because this habit that we have to always be finding and solving the problem is largely self-directed, right? Because who do we know the most about? Whose thoughts, speech, and actions do we observe the most? Right? Our own, right? The 60,000 thoughts a day that modern neuroscience is telling me I'm having. Well, you know, I'm privy to all of them, right? And you're privy to this tiny, tiny percentage of them each day, you know? And so apply that problem bent, negative leaning perspective that we have built in, right? Biologically and psychologically built in, evolved in, right? And our data set being predominantly from ourselves, where we end up is this place where in myself and in person after person that I encounter, when you really tease out what their relationship is with themselves, when you really get them to voice, whether it's out loud or in a journal form, you know, what's actually going on in here, like how they're talking to themselves, it's not very nice. It doesn't have a lot of gratitude in it, right? It's very this, you know, it's very taskmaster, finger wagging, like a lot of negotiating by withholding, right? Like, oh, well, you know, you can have this if you do this good thing, you know, or you'll be happy if you can achieve X, Y, and Z. You know? It's very negative. It's very negative. And so I think that when we're trying to cultivate gratitude as a practice, that's the best place to start, right? When the Buddha gave the teaching of the middle way, right, it's this very simple classic teaching, right, where he was addressing a group of people and there was a player of a stringed instrument present. For our purposes, let's call that person a guitar player. And the Buddha looked at the guitar player and said, "Hey, guitar player, what happens if the strings on your instrument are too loose?" And the musician said, "Oh, Lord Buddha, no sound." And he said, "Okay, well, what happens if the strings on your instrument are too tight?" And he responded, "Oh, Lord Buddha, bad sound." And the Buddha said, "Well, there you go. It's the teaching of the middle way. That's it." Right? Now, that's a really deep teaching in like 5 sentences. And so what I see in myself and in my own practice as well is that it's very easy to misinterpret. Right? It's very easy to misinterpret because you could hear that teaching and think what you're hearing is that the middle way means to be in tune, right? To neither be too tight or too loose, but to be in tune all the time, right? A lot of people, myself included, hear that in that story, in that teaching, and in many of the teachings of mindfulness. right? The idea is like, okay, increase your mindfulness and get really aware, and then never stray from the middle way. Never go and get angry again. Never get sad again, right? But this is not realistic. This is not what we really are. Just like the guitar, right? That if I come upon a guitar and it's a little bit out of tune, does it make sense for me to yell at the guitar? Is there anything wrong with the guitar? You know, is the guitar broken and need to be thrown away or punished? Right. The answer to all those questions are obvious, right? The guitar is just being a guitar. It's of a nature to fall in and out of tune. If I leave it by the fireplace, it falls out of tune. If I leave it in the cold car, it falls out of tune. If I don't play it for too long, it falls out of tune. If I play it a lot, it falls out of tune. There's nothing wrong with the guitar. It just needs to be, by its nature, tuned over and over again. And in that way, right, inside of that huge range of too tight, too loose, and in the middle, right, it's experiencing its perfection. It's experiencing its middle way. And so the teaching of the middle way is not about this tightrope that we're walking, you know, through life, like trying to avoid all these extremes. It's about acceptance. Right? The teaching of the middle way is saying like, oh, all of this is okay. You know, and the more time I spend in acceptance, when I do start to flutter out to the extremes, you know, I was diagnosed bipolar as an adolescent. You know, I've had a lot of extreme emotional states and mental states in my life, you know, and I spent so many years, right, as a yogi, standing on one foot, right, as a meditator, like sitting down and trying to control my mind and trying to not have angry thoughts and not have sad thoughts, right? All misunderstandings. And then at a certain point, I saw the limit to that. I was like, oh man, I am never going to get past this experience, right, of being alive. I'm never going to stop having this very dissatisfied, very unhappy lens on my camera unless I stop holding this belief. Stop holding this belief that there's something wrong with me and that these practices are designed to fix that problem. You know, that is not the case. That is not the case. I'm this amazing wild man, you know, who's always going downhill too fast with no brakes, you know, using all four lanes and bumping up against the guardrails, you know, and that's my life. And it's totally okay. And it's totally okay. And sometimes I'm way over there and I need to be tuned back to the middle. And sometimes I'm way over there and I need to be tuned back to the middle. And that's just fine. And that's just fine. And so then, right, you hear how if I can hold my life experience with that story, with that, through that lens, gratitude is really available to me. Because no matter what happens, I can be like, oh man, look at me, you know, I get really excited about that stuff. Aren't I grateful for it? You know, woo, I can be all the way on the other end of the spectrum and be like, whoa, look at Dave. Holy cow. He can really touch depression. Like he knows what that is. And isn't that wonderful, right? Because that means when I'm hanging out with other people that experiences depression, I can talk to them. We can relate to each other, you know, in the 30 years that I spent in psychotherapy and going through programs like the mindful way through depression and on, you know, all the ways that you can manage that. Man, I could be really sad about that, or I could be so grateful, right? It benefits me so much now as a mindfulness teacher because so many people in our society are dealing with these, you know, seemingly out of control, like sometimes even imprisoning habits. And you know, my answer is, yeah, me too. Me too. You know? And so then I get to be grateful for even the awareness, right? I can be doing something out of habit. I can be, you know, going down that well-worn path in my mind, right? The one that's really wide and that somebody has been chopping away at with a machete for decades and that I've been tromping back and forth on over and over and over again in my mind, right? That path from calm to anger, for example, because of how I was raised. I was raised in kind of unsafe circumstances in the Bronx, New York City in the 70s and 80s. We were poor. I'm a first generation American. There was a lot of real danger, and so I still have a lot of those buttons, they can be pushed. and now, I can see myself like in a set of circumstances and just like have the hair on the back of my neck stand up and feel really unsafe, and like I'm gonna say something or do something I might regret, right? I can see how easy it is still, right? 25 years into mindfulness practice, right? To just walk down that very familiar path and end up in that, that tough bit of my mental forest. There's a lot of thorns right there in the anger place, But thanks to our practice, right, I can take a step back even as that's happening and say like, wow, I hope I don't, say anything too crazy or do anything too crazy right now, but man, am I grateful that I'm observing it all. Like, this gives me the opportunity to learn from this. As Thich Nhat Hanh liked to say, if you're gonna suffer, suffer well. Suffer well, pay attention to it. Embrace it as it's happening. Give yourself a chance to learn from it. And then, and only then, do I have a chance of next time not being so, quite so much out of tune, not needing quite so much of a tweak, right? Because I've accepted the last time, and therefore my understanding of myself has grown, my love of myself has grown, right? And all of my capacity to self-manage comes out of my capacity to self-understand. So all my capacity to make decisions is based on how much love I have inside myself, for me. But that's counterintuitive, right? That's counterintuitive because the rest of society is saying, oh, no. Like, the way I'm going to correct your behavior is by withholding something, or by punishing you in some way, or by making it really embarrassing to be a certain way, or by making it really unsocially acceptable to be a certain way. On and on, right? There's a lot of pressure like that in our work lives and in our social lives, and for some of us, even in our family lives. And so gratitude starts right here, right here, by just being grateful that I'm a guitar and that I am figuring out, with all of your help, like how to keep tuning myself. I'm just getting better and better at it, And then practicing that, and this is true of all of our practices, right? I don't necessarily try to follow my breathing when I'm being robbed at gunpoint, right? That's not a good time to all of a sudden start trying to practice following my breathing, and controlling my emotions in that moment. And I have to have practiced first in more neutral or more conducive settings like this one here, right? I have to develop that skill. Just like, going to the gym, and with all the right equipment and with all the right clothes on and the hours set aside and some upbeat music playing, right? I train then when the circumstances are perfect, so that, when I get back from Costco, I have the physical strength to unload my car. But it doesn't make sense to do the opposite, right? It doesn't make sense to never train under, idyllic circumstances and then all of a sudden, try to get myself to carry a lot of heavy things. A 4-story walk up or whatever. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's not a good way to train. And so the last thing, because there is one more thing I want to cover about gratitude, because once we start to develop that internal gratitude and start to appreciate just the fact that with all our flaws, warts and all, that it's pretty miraculous that we get to be here and that we've encountered the practice and Sangha. And we have all these supports, right? All these conditions that so many people don't have, to be able to improve and to learn and to tune. Then pretty naturally, right, gratitude for other people and for things outside of us starts to increase. In part because it feels good, like, why do I like to eat pumpkin pie? Because it feels good, because of the experience it gives me, the state it puts me in, the memories it triggers. it's an easy way to produce a lot of positivity. And gratitude actually gets pretty easy once you give yourself permission to be a human being and to make mistakes. Because once you start doing that work, you can much more easily do it for other people. Right? You can much more easily see people doing their best and making their mistakes and trying this and trying that, playing out their karmically conditioned and socialized personalities. Like, it's not like they got to choose off the hat, right? I didn't get to choose being from the Bronx, like, a lot of it is just us playing out our childhoods, for the rest of our lives. And once you can hold, to whatever extent you can, like the people around you and the circumstances around you in that light, like how much can we improve? Can we do 1% better today? As opposed to being really attached to what's right, and what's wrong, and what's good, and what's bad, and what's acceptable, and what's unacceptable. Then gratitude starts to open up. It starts to become one of those more well-worn paths. And then a lot of doors open. Right? One is something I like to call hard gratitude, where you can, if you practice gratitude enough, when it's easy to do, then something really challenging can happen, and gratitude can be available to you. Something really unpleasant, something triggering and unexpected can happen, and you can say, at the same time that you're watching all of your habits play out, that you're watching your personality get scared, get angry, get sad, shut down, try to take control, whatever it does, at the same time that that's happening, a part of you, that you've been strengthening, right, in your gratitude gym, when the stakes were low, is there, it's present, and it can tell you the truth. Like, ooh, Dave, today's really hard, but you need this. Like, you're learning from this. This is making you stronger. This is the pain that you're experiencing right now is the gift of clarity. Because you're only experiencing pain right now, deep dissatisfaction in areas where you really care. And so, when the hardest things are happening, I'm getting a master class in what I actually care about, what I'm still really attached to. And then I get to decide, if it's the, love and health of my niece and nephew, well, then I'm cool with being that attached. I'm not even trying to change that. I'm just going to eat the difficulty that brings, right? Because that makes me really sad about things like global warming. That makes me really, it's my young niece and nephew that keep me caring about the rest of the world, as it unfolds. And I'm okay with that. But sometimes, right, that difficult thing, right, will be around like a business thing, and I'll get so upset and stressed and afraid and angry and hurt and whatever, scared and confused. Business is wild, and like everything. And then, right, I can look at that pain and I can look at it like, wow, this is a disproportionate response. I actually don't care about this that much. I do not hold as my aspiration, to be wealthy to a point where I'm living in luxury while other people are starving. I don't actually care about this that much. So you see, right? That's hard gratitude. And then the last kind of gratitude that I want to introduce, and it may sound like I'm describing a linear process, but I'm not really. Once you start practicing with any of this stuff, it all starts to sort of percolate and happen on its own, in a beautiful chaos that will be your experience of your practice. It's helpful, for the purposes of talking about it this way, in a condensed period of time, to kind of go from one to another as I'm doing, but I don't pretend to be offering a kind of a linear roadmap, just to be clear. So somewhere in this practice of gratitude, the final gratitude that I think about, I call it deep gratitude. will start to arise. Because my definition of mindfulness is paying attention with love, or as my teacher would say, paying attention for the purposes of understanding. Right? If what I care about the most as things are happening inside and outside of me is how much I understand them, how much love is present, then I'm in my mindfulness. That's in the simplest way how I define the practice. And so I would posit that at a certain point, I can't be interacting with things mindfully. I cannot be paying attention to people and things in a way that's infused with love and not be grateful for them. Right? And not be grateful for them. And I'll give you an example. I'm drinking this delicious tea while I'm talking with you. And so my first thought might be, if I were to take a sip, like, oh, that's so delicious. I will too, because I do want one. Right? Oh, that's so delicious. So that's gratitude. But then I can look a little bit deeper into the tea. I can ask myself, like, well, what am I really holding here? Like, what is this? And well, I know, for example, that the water wouldn't be here just miraculously pouring out of my tap here in the city of San Diego if it weren't for the rain clouds. And so no rain clouds, no cup of tea. And so very quickly, right? Just like that, I went from, oh, this is so tasty, to, wow, how do I have a cup of the clouds in my hand? How can my kitchen provide this to me? What a miracle. And then I can go a level deeper, right? And I can think about, well, geez, the tea itself, it's grown in India, curated and maintained and, lovingly attended by countless people, their hands like handled. And then it had to be packed and exported and stored and sold and advertised and packaged and, on and on and on. And so here again, right, in just a few sentences, I go from, oh, this is so delicious, right? One level of gratitude to, oh my God, like thousands of people all over the world were necessary. Their loving efforts were necessary to make this experience possible for me right now. Right? Everything is like this. Everything is like this. Right? And so deep gratitude is another way, it's a tighter focus on the lens of gratitude, where you can look at every single thing and be like, oh, like this was hand hammered in Japan, like, this came from the other side of the world. Like, how did this end up in my living room in San Diego? How some crazy Irish Ecuadorian kid from the Bronx, like, holding this right now. Gratitude as an internal practice, hard gratitude, gratitude as a recognition that it's present even when things are challenging, that it's available to some extent even when things are challenging, and then deep gratitude, like gratitude that points us to interbeing, to our interconnected nature with everything. So you see, gratitude, that one practice, is a door all the way. It's a door all the way, and I'll take you all the way home. I'll take you all the way home. Well, thank you so much for listening. That was so fun. I'll pass it back to Nancy.